Good afternoon. Welcome to Instituto Cervantes Leeds and Manchester, to our YouTube channel. As you know, we are celebrating in the UK the traditional Black History Month. And today we have the great honor to have the Professor Manuel Barcia from the Leeds University, who will present his we will discuss with the author about it. But before we start talking, I will introduce our guest, Manuel Barcia. Muchas gracias, Manuel, por estar aquí. Thank you very much for being with us tonight. Manuel Barcia studied history in Havana and then took a master in comparative history and PhD in history at the University of Essex. After concluding his PhD, he went to teach at the University of Essex and Nottingham before coming to Leeds in 2026. His research focuses on the history of slavery and the slave trade in the 19th-century Atlantic world. He's also contributor to the Washington Spectator, the Huffington Post, the Independent, Daily Telegraph, and Al Jazeera in English. In 2014, he was awarded the very prestigious Philip Leverhulme Prize History, given every year to researchers whose work has already attracted international recognition and whose future career is exceptionally promising. He has been also a non-resident fellow at the Hutchins Center of Afro-Latin American Institute in Harvard University, a visiting fellow at the Gilder Lehrman Center in the study of slavery, resistance, and abolition of Yale University. Professor Barcia's expertise in slavery and wide-ranging from piracy to medical history, and also he has published another 3 books and many monographs. So thank you again, Manuel, and let's begin with a brief summary of the book to put our listeners in the context of your work.
Okay, I do that, right? Yeah. Yeah, thank you very much. I want to start by thanking the Cervantes Institute, both in Manchester and in Leeds. As you were saying before, we haven't had the opportunity to meet in person yet. I mean, personnel has changed over the years, and we are not acquainted with each other. But hopefully, this will change in the near future. So, first and foremost, thank you for inviting me and for having me.
Thank you to you.
Yeah. I'm basically what I'm planning to do is to give a brief, and I say brief with inverted commas because I always have in mind to do things quickly, but they not necessarily end up being that quick. So basically, what I am going to do is to give a brief outlook of the book, how I got here, why I got involved with these issues, and something that probably I should open with is that this book is not specifically focused on the Hispanic War in any sense, although Spain and Spanish colonies in the Americas, they are, part of the protagonists of the story, and so also Spanish slave traders are protagonists of this story. So this is a book that incorporates different historiographies and that was written with documents from archives from all over the place in quite a few different languages as well. So this is not the first time that I present this book. I have presented a few times, and I always made the same joke. So I'm actually I have started boring myself with this joke, but I'm going to say one more time. When I started, things stop being funny at some point. They're not funny for me anymore, but I know that people that have fun with this. When I started writing this book, I didn't have the slightest idea in mind that I was going to publish a book about epidemics and during a pandemic. This was never part of a plan. I think it worked out quite well because people have now interest in these topics, and maybe before they wouldn't have. But I honestly swear that I didn't know what the future held. I really didn't know. I do think that there are a number of things that we can learn from the history of the struggle against disease in the 19th century slave trade. That lessons that are applied, that can be applied to this pandemic, to the stuff that we all have been living through in the past year and a half, give or take. And I think that they are really important. We're talking about issues such as cooperation, the way that we need to cooperate with each other to share knowledge, to care for each other. For instance, the distribution of vaccines across the world has been has been done in a very unequal way. There are nations in Africa, Asia, and Latin America where still people haven't been vaccinated, or the vaccination rate are quite low, and it's not because people don't want to get vaccinated, it's because people because they haven't have access to the vaccines yet. And in the meantime, in the global north, we are already entering the what you could call phase 2. We are having booster shots and stuff like that, and it's really it's unfair by whatever way you measure it. So I ended up, yeah.
Sorry,
jump in.
Go ahead.
If you want to jump in, please, by all means. So the reason I ended up writing this book is this was not premeditated in any way. I was, for many years, I have been working on the history of slavery and the slave trade, and I have been, since the 1990s, actually, I started collecting information about medical history. I always found it interesting, if you wish. I had a colleague who was working on the cholera epidemic in Havana of 1833, and maybe that had something to do with this interest in medical history. And I started collecting information. I never thought that this cropping of information was going to lead to a full book at some point, but it did. At some point, I had to decide whether I wanted to keep using this information as vignettes to add to other parts of my research, or whether I actually wanted to submerge myself into a completely new field for me. I'm not a medical historian. I am not a medical historian, and I need to make this clear. I'm pretty much, walking in a tightrope here. And but all this information eventually led me to write this book. And I think that the reason I did that is because I started my career working on the history of slavery in Cuba. And then at some point I found myself comparing Cuba and Brazil. And then after living a little bit in Africa, I decided that I really wanted to work to bring Africa into whatever I was doing. And I ended up writing what David Armitage has called transatlantic history, doing transatlantic history. But at some point I realized that I wanted to do more than that, that comparing two places or three places was really not for me. I wanted to write circumatlantic history. I wanted to bring all the places of his story together, the Spanish and Portuguese and French slave traders, the British trying to abolish the slave trade and doing their own business, and using these abolition campaigns as a backdoor to do their own businesses, to problematize his story as much as I could. And also, of course, the Africans, which at the end of the story are the protagonists of this story as well. So linking these three continents, linking the backgrounds of different peoples and regions. And also, of course, there is a linguistic challenge working with sources from different empires, produced by different empires in different languages, and trying to assemble that puzzle was...
it came also a bit into when you went into contact with these realities, Cuba, which is your country, but Brazil, Africa, and then Europe also. Then it evolved, and then that was the result of the book. But I can imagine that reading the book is a wonderful book, and that the research has been immense, and you had to consult many archives. And I can suppose that it was quite a hard work and a bit complicated. Can you explain how was the process?
Well, the process was, like it's pretty much the same challenge that I tried to take every time that I work on a book. In this case, actually, if anything, it was, even though I had to work with documents in different languages, we're talking about Dutch, even German, French. I think that the challenge to a certain extent was less acute than in previous books. For instance, my previous book, I actually was trying to find, to try to bring out the voices of Africans who have been enslaved and taken to Cuba and Brazil, and finding these voices in the sources was extremely complicated. In this case, I still was trying to do that, but I was able to complement this with more mainstream voices from medical doctors, from politicians, from colonial officers, etc., etc. So it was a more balanced case, if you wish. The problem was to access certain archives. Archives in Africa, for instance, are not easy to archive, and to access some archives in Latin America, even though you manage to go to archive reproducing documents in itself. This is a case of Spain as well, by the way. It's really a pain. I'm actually happy to report that Spain is starting to pioneer now, to pilot a new program that should allow us to take pictures in archives, which has never been allowed before. But yeah, it was a challenge I had to do with documents that were scattered all over the Atlantic and beyond, and to try to put together, when you write the history of one empire or one place, everything converges in that place, right? When you're trying to put together the history of different places, different empires, different colonies, and all of this have to come together in the same history, it is like a puzzle. It becomes a challenge to actually be able to produce a narrative that brings these things seemingly without forcing them into a narrative, because what you don't want is to be sticking things and
that's right,
just for the sake of it. So,
yes, but because in the book you are the analysis of the illness, the health problems, but and the reality of the 19th century with the abolition, but at the same time with the illegal slave trade.
Yeah.
No, and I can guess that some of this illegal trade was not so well documented. Yeah.
This is a conversation that quite a few colleagues of mine and we have all the time. On the one hand, anything that is illegal, I mean, once the British start enforcing abolition in the Atlantic, all these slave trades are going to go on the ground, right? So ensuring slave voyages or even producing documents is done in the shadows. The thing here, however, is that the British and the French, and to a certain extent the Portuguese as well, and the Americans, are going to be stopping slave ships. And whenever they stop one of the ships, they confiscate whatever correspondence is on board. And there is quite a lot of this correspondence in archives in different places in the US, in the UK, in Spain. You can find them because the British and the other countries, they had set up courts to judge these slave ships. So the documentation produced by these courts is that also includes the letters of the slave trade captains, etc., is there. But this actually has presented a challenge as well, which is the fact that precisely because the slave trade becomes illegal after 1807, in the case of Brazil after 1830, but little by little it becomes more and more illegal. It creates a situation in which, when you look at the history of the history of medicine in the transatlantic slave trade, there is quite a substantial body of literature for the pre-1807 period, for before 1807, and very little for this period. And it's kind of funny because almost in any other field, you will notice that there are more studies about the 19th century than there are about the 18th century. And yet for this specific field, it's actually the opposite. Many of these sources are in Spanish and in Portuguese, and this is a challenge for English-speaking scholars who don't speak these languages.
Yeah, I suppose so. Yes, you have already mentioned that, but you have worked and analyzed the reality of the Atlantic Ocean as a geographical unit. No, this
Yeah,
is one of the core matters of the ideas of the book,
yeah.
as a fundamental concept of understanding the reality you are analyzing. Could you comment about this, the ocean as a body, as a
Well, this could take forever, by the way, because I don't know if you're aware of this, but I'm one of the editors of Atlantic Studies, which is the main journal in the field of Atlantic Studies.
yeah, but
Explain Atlantic history.
I know it can be a challenge to just to resume for our audience or not for scholars, but
Yeah.
I think it's something very interesting. No, this approach,
Yeah.
no, as you had mentioned at the beginning, no.
Yeah, we see the Atlantic as think about the internet, right? The internet is like this connect body of connectivity that brings people together. So if most historians are very familiar with the work, for instance, of Fernand Braudel, what he did with the Mediterranean. So in recent years, historians have started to look at the Atlantic in similar ways. The Atlantic is kind of an avenue that connects people from different continents and beyond, because we always think of the Atlantic, or mostly you think of the Atlantic as a body of water, but it's more than that. There is a cultural Atlantic as well that includes other areas like the Sahara or Chile or Zanzibar and Mozambique and Madagascar and this body of water that connects all these people, that bring these people together, and what Mary Louise Prat has referred to as contact zones, it also gets I'm going to refer to it as a 5G. There is a technological advancement, development in the 19th century, which is the steam machine. So steamships come into play as well. So this connectivity speeds up. The traveling times between one place and the other are reduced significantly once you have steamships in the Atlantic. So I refer to it as a 5G because basically what it does is that it speeds up things. But it makes for instance, slave traders are going to realize very soon that they need steamships to be able to outrun the anti-slave trade ship patrol ships, which, by the way, are also introducing steamships. So you get an ocean that is a physical entity, but it's also a cultural how can I refer to this? A cultural state.
Yes, because yes, as you have said, we have the idea of the Mediterranean, traditional North-South Mediterranean, the Roman Empire, or the different empires that have been north and southwards to the Mediterranean, but the Atlantic, considering the American, African, is as you have said, it is a reality, but that had not been for such a long time considered as an entity, as you are explaining. Another key concept related also to the reality of the ocean is the contact zones. The main subject of the book is the illness, the fevers, the health problems of the slaves, how it evolved, how conditioned the realities of the different ports or places where they went. But the contact zones are very important for the analysis and to understand the book and this reality. Could you explain us about these contact zones and what does it mean, and what were the for the illegal slave trade, for the development and the flourishing of the disease?
Well, this is a concept that was coined and developed by Mary Louise Prat about 20 years ago, probably a bit more, and basically it refers to spaces where people come together and they exchange knowledge, they exchange merchandise, they exchange body fluids. These are places where the kind of places where cooperation and knowledge transfer occur. And of course, the transatlantic slave trade had its own contact zones. The removal and displacement of people is going to create, it's going to disseminate disease. That's the way epidemics pretty much move around. and the contact zones are going to be the perfect place for this kind of dissemination. On the other hand, they are also going to be a perfect place, or they're going to provide the perfect environment for these historical actors to share what Pablo Gomez has referred to as fragmentary medical knowledge. This is a place where you can actually see how medical cultures are going to be changing throughout this period. This place where you can also see medical practitioners doing the work as well. Very often there are narratives of them struggling in this place. So they are very they are crucial places, both for the dissemination of disease, but also for the containment and for the struggle against this. Is the medical corpus of the 19th century. This knowledge that is going to become part of this medical corpus very often is going to be integrated into what we know, and into the corpus precisely in these medical zones. Books are going to be written there, letters are going to be written there, etc.
Yeah, the central figure, of course, in these contact zones are the practitioners you have mentioned now. The practitioners that we might have the idea that there were practitioners that came from Europe, but it was not the reality. Can you speak about this?
Yeah, well,
how was the medicine of the practitioner at that time in the different places?
This is a topic that actually can help opening up a little bit the narrative as well, the discussion. When we think about the 19th century, obviously this is happening. This is the mid 19th century. This is the peak of the Romantic period. This is when Beethoven and Schubert are writing, and I really think that the people who are writing in this period, those who are writing down about anything, they are very influenced by what's going on around them, including Romanticism, and that actually led eventually to the creation of this romantic idea of the European or American, the Western white man, superheroing his way around these places and curing everybody and sharing light and knowledge on savages that inhabit these places. So I did my very best to avoid falling in this trap of romanticizing or if you wish, turning these people into heroes. That doesn't mean that I don't incorporate them in the story, right? They are important to the story and telling. They very often they actually lost their lives doing these things, but the story is way more richer and complex than just talking about white Europeans or white Americans going into these contact zones and enlightening people. And there is something else that relates to this and also relates to the romantic narrative that we inherited and very often we fail to confront and to challenge. And it's the fear. I don't know if fear is a word of this. Is a risk that we take whenever we are writing about these issues of falling into this positivist, Whiggish, as we say in England, Whiggish because of the Whig Party narrative of history. Historical narrative in which there is a history of progress, right? Next year is going to be better.
History.
Yeah, exactly. Next year is going to be better than this year, and obviously we have noticed since 2015 that that's not the case. It's to avoid that, but to bring non-Western practitioners into the history, into a story that I was trying to tell, was at the very center of the book, and I think that especially in the last chapter I managed to do so quite well. But it is a challenge as well because history is written by the powerful, history is written by the victors, and very often the information you get about the work of these non-Western practitioners is through the lens of Western practitioners or Western observers. So
but the slave traders, they have an aim, is to make money as much as possible in a shortest time. But the practitioners is not so clear. Maybe that is this romantic idea why they went to Africa or to the Americas. I don't know what was the aim. I mean, there might be a financial, of course, reason, but
there is always a financial reason every single time. Whenever you talk about British abolitionism, I keep telling this to everybody, abolitionism is going to be a backdoor for colonialism. It's going to be a backdoor for the implementation of free trade, which is obviously free trade for the British, but not for the Africans or for whoever else they impose it on. There is quite a lot of coercion going on here. There is, to a certain extent, I wouldn't go as far as calling it re-enslavement, but there is the recruitment of former slaves liberated by the mixed commission courts and the vice admiralty courts. They are sent to the Caribbean to work on British plantations in the Caribbean. So you get, or they are enlisted in the West Indies regiments. So you get a lot of this here. It's way more complicated than that. But medical practitioners are no exception. You know, either they are going there purely because of the money, or they are going there because of the adventure, but there is also the money, or they are going there because they are forced to go there. Because if you are a doctor in the Spanish Navy or in the Portuguese Navy or in the British Navy, and they tell you your ship is being, your vessel has been sent to the West African squadron, you have to go. You know.
Yeah,
they try to get out of it, but they can't. You know.
Yes, this slavery was abolished, and then there was the galleons that were fighting the illegal trade. How did the system work? Because we have also the ships that were captured and a system of different jurisdictions and courts that you have mentioned before.
Yeah.
Could you tell us about it?
Well, this is basically a result of British abolition, the British abolition of the slave trade, where we have to remember it's not the same as the abolition of slavery. It's two different things. But the abolition of a slave trade happens in 1807. And as soon as it happens, the British are going to take it upon themselves to patrol the Atlantic. The Congress of Vienna, after the Napoleonic Wars conclude, is going to leave Great Britain in the strongest possible position to force themselves upon other European powers, which are still trafficking in slaves. So what you get is the British imposing themselves on the Dutch, on the Spanish and the Portuguese within a very short period of time in the late 1810s. Eventually, they get to the Brazilians, they get to the French. The only ones they never managed to get around are the Americans, and they eventually signed an agreement in the 1860s. But what they do, and they get to all the new Latin American republics as well. What they do with these treaties is that they create the legal structures to be able to judge and, when necessary, adjudicate ships that they are captured trafficking human beings across the Atlantic. And after the 1830s, also ships that they are considered to be engaged in the transatlantic slave trade, even if they don't have human beings on board. Basically, they evaluate whether the amount of food, for instance, or the amount of water that any of the ships has on board is appropriate vis-a-vis the number of the crew. If they see that they have water for, I don't know, 200, 300, 400 people, they assume that the ship is going to be engaged in transatlantic slave trade, and they take it to the courts as well. And very often they are, yeah.
That they were to which court? Let's say
it depends. There are the originally there were the vice admiralty courts, and you know, the French, they have their own courts as well. The Portuguese, they have their own courts. The Americans have their own courts. But the British, which are the ones driving all these, they are going to create, they have the vice admiralty courts. But once they sign agreements with specific countries, what they do is that they create bilateral courts, which are called courts of mixed commission. One of them is always located in a British territory, that almost invariably the territory is going to be Freetown in Sierra Leone. And the equivalent in the partner country is going to be placed in a different city. For instance, in the case of Spain, the court is placed in Havana. In the case of Portugal, the court is placed in Rio, and when Brazil becomes independent, the court is taken to Luanda in Angola, and then the Brazilians are going to sign a treaty, and the court is going to be in Rio again. The Dutch are going to have their own court in Paramaribo, in Suriname, and so on and so forth. So you get these bilateral courts that are going to function in a similar way. So whenever a slave vessel is captured, it's going to be taken to the closest appropriate court. So if it is a Portuguese ship, a ship with a Portuguese flag captured in the Caribbean, they still have to take it across the Atlantic to Freetown or to Angola or to Rio, depending on the period. So it's also this is a point that I make in this book as well, is that abolition had it had also a negative effect on the life of Africans who were released from slave traders very often, because the way this legal framework was set up very often led to more suffering than what it remedy, actually.
Yeah,
imagine Africans crossing the Atlantic. There is a very famous case of a ship called the Maria da Gloria, has been studied by Martin Jing and others. And this ship is captured in the coast of Africa. It's taken to Sierra Leone. From Sierra Leone, it's taken to Brazil. From Brazil, it's taken back to Sierra Leone. It's something like that. It's a crazy thing. And the Africans are dying on board.
Yeah, all the time. Yeah, I suppose. Yeah. Yes, one of the core of us points of the book is the advance of medicine through the exchange of knowledge. No.
Yeah.
There was the slave trade illegal, and then there was those galleons that control. But at the end, the common enemy was the illnesses, the fevers, and they had this overt cooperation of the enemies against the fevers.
Yeah, you have to remember that these people are dealing with the unknown very often. Fevers, for instance, there were many fevers that they all look the same. There are diseases that they don't know how the diseases, most of them anyway, are being transmitted from one person to another. There are discussions during this period between contagionists and anti-contagionists that are trying to argue that diseases like cholera or the bubonic plague or yellow fever, they are not contagious, even though there is the evidence of the contrary. And sometimes these debates are going to determine how everything else takes place. But yeah, diseases are going to be the common enemy, and people are going to cooperate. Even enemies, people who were in different sides of this conflict, and I usually refer to the slave trade as a conflict after Marcus Rediker, but they are going to be forced to share knowledge. They have no option, because these diseases are not going to discriminate between Africans and Europeans or enslaved and free. They don't. And they realize, even the worst of the historical actors that I've seen here, they realize that it is to their own convenience to actually collaborate rather than isolate themselves. Last year, when Donald Trump walked away from the World Health Organization, I could not but make this comparison almost daily. How slave traders, who were the worst of the worst of the worst, by the way, I have been called woke for calling slave traders evil, but I continue to do it. These people were the worst. Still, they realized that in the face of epidemics, maybe it makes sense for me to collaborate with my enemies. Donald Trump could not figure that one out. They just, and we have a lot of the same. For instance, the vaccination or inoculation against the smallpox, it was widely well received wherever people went with their method during this time. Whether the Africans were sharing with Africans or Europeans were sharing with people in the Americas, the vaccination against smallpox is going to be successful, and we actually eventually got rid of smallpox because almost everybody would take the vaccine. People were willing to accept that medical knowledge has produced something new that can actually spare me from either dying or spending the rest of my life disfigured. And yet, you see, thanks to internet mostly, we are in a situation today in which many people don't want to take a vaccine because, I don't know.
And at those time was not so obvious, yeah?
multiple
because there
reasons.
was check
Yeah,
and error and success.
yeah, multiple reasons. Some people actually are concerned because they think that there is a chip inside the vaccine that is going to allow for 5G. Well, you know what? If there really is a chip, I think that they should actually come up with that kind of vaccine. We are carrying mobiles anyway. They would save me quite a lot of time if I already have the chip inside. I'm still carrying the mobile. They can still track me. So it's insane rationalization of the stuff that is happening in this world. And you look at the 19th century, and people seem to be, and again, this links up with the Whiggish narrative of history. People seem to be more in sync with what is needed for them to survive than people today.
Yeah, and also what you mentioned in the book is that the practitioners from Africa, in many cases, they were more advanced than the Eurocentric idea we have from Europe, positivism, science, and in that case, it was not the case at all.
Yeah, and you get this today again. I mean, when this epidemic began, the epidemic is coming from China, the Chinese start wearing face masks. And they, not only the Chinese, Asians in general are wearing face masks. The epidemic seems to be controlled there before it's controlled anywhere else. And you are wondering, maybe we should wear face masks, even if it doesn't work, it seems to be working there. So why not wear them here? But no, because until a European doctor or an American doctor says we should wear face masks, no one agrees to wear a face mask. Nobody wants to wear them anymore. But that's the situation you face. Is the dismissal of the other because there are intrinsic, deep racial and civilizational fake beliefs that we still are living with.
Yeah, and those methods to fight the disease in the book is also, you speak about the quarantines and how they worked, but they were also used for political, as a political means to controlling.
They were and they are, The thing with establishing a quarantine is that quarantines very often are just a spectacle, right? When COVID began, we started with the lockdowns, and we really didn't know how COVID was transmitted yet. We had an idea, we were guessing. If you remember, we were all washing our hands, 10, 20 times per day. I remember having my hands burned of so much soap and so much, these liquids and hand sanitizers. And as it happens, very few cases of COVID are actually, very, very rarely COVID is transmitted by touch. But this explains, when you don't have a proper knowledge of how disease is transmitted, the quarantines may be completely useless. But quarantines always, even when they are useless, they serve one main purpose, and it's to give the appearance of being in control, of doing something that is actually starving the disease and stopping it. If you don't take quarantines and the disease goes, it goes into a rampage, then people will criticize you. You could have done something. But in the face of a new disease that you don't know how to stop, quarantines actually seem to be a very straightforward, easy way of sorting things out. You isolate people, and that's it. And there are, of course, there are different kinds of quarantines. One of them is what New Zealand has done, which is isolating themselves from the rest of the world. Many countries did that to a different degrees of success. Or there are the kind of quarantines that we had here in other places, which are lockdowns, in which you are actually staying at your home and you only go out when you have to. But ultimately, even when they are effective, they are still serving a political purpose. They always do, every single time.
How did it work at all time in the 19th century? These quarantines for the ships or the slaves that came, there were special places, or they were kept in the ships? There
were quarantine ships. There were, depending on the place, there were specific places that usually they were placed downwind from the main population. So you have cases like in Clarencetown in Fernando Po, the quarantine station is going to be placed in a peninsula, which is downwind from the main population, from Clarence. In Havana, they are going to be placed in the region of Vedado or in the Castillo de la Punta, which are both of them downwind from the main city. In Rio de Janeiro, you have the same situation. They are going to be normally placed far away from inhabited areas and downwind whenever possible. In the case of Santa Elena, for instance, there's going to be in the capital of Santa Elena, the island of Santa Elena, is in a very narrow valley, which is called Jamestown. And next to that valley, there's a huge mountain, and there's another valley, which is called Rupertstown. They are going to be placed there, which is completely isolated from the capital by a mountain. So there is no way of getting through even today. In Freetown, in Sierra Leone, they are going to have a hospital that is going to be built in Kisi, which is, again, downwind from Freetown. So almost everywhere, when they are on land, they are going to be placed on isolated places. But very often they are going to be done in ships. They are going to designate specific ships, sometimes actually capture slave ships, that they become quarantine stations or hospital stations. So.
When we speak about ships, you also mentioned some examples of concrete ships, not in general. Could you, there's a Negrito, the example, one of those examples to spend or to tell about this Negrito, one of those ships in the book.
I'm probably not the best person to talk about the Negrito because there are colleagues who have worked on this ship for years now. But this is a terrible story. It's a very, very small ship that is carrying potatoes between the Canary Islands, between two of the Canary Islands. This is 1840-41, and somehow they end up with a cargo or human cargo. They picked up the human cargo in Upper Guinea, and they take it to Cuba. But these people were not de facto transatlantic slave traders, right? They were trading in potatoes, so they didn't have any sort of experience trading human beings. And what is going to happen is that in the voyage towards Cuba, they are going to pretty much rape almost everyone in the ship and kill quite a few people. And most of the people in the ship are children, which makes things much gruesome. So this is one of these cases where these men take the level of callousness to such a level that authorities, even Spanish authorities, they feel themselves obliged to act and do something about it because it's unheard of what they have done. But this is not the only case. There are other cases as well where violence was very common. It was widespread.
Yeah, terrible. We have, I didn't mention at the beginning, but in some of our audience, you have to ask Manuel Barcia about the book or what we have been discussing. Please feel free to write in our chat, and I will be delighted to put the questions to him. The book, well, the slave trade is obviously a terrible, horrible reality, but you describe the whole history, the century of the disease, the progress of the medicine, without making it's a described way of doing that without not making very much moral judgments about it. Yeah.
This is not the first time that people have asked me about moral judgment in the last week. It's an interesting question. I think that it is not our place to judge people. I mean, again, the reason I was mentioning this thing that people calling me woke for calling slave traders evil has to do with moral judgment. Because, yeah, I feel like, they were bastards, They were actually trying to make a living. And the interesting thing is that when you read the letters, you realize that they were human beings, They had wives, they had children that they miss. There is a human dimension even to a monster. But the whole idea of writing books is actually of doing history, doing research is to actually try to present the story as a historian sees it. Especially, I'm very aware that passing moral judgment in the 21st century, something that happened in the 19th century, is flawed by definition. Although, of course, I would again call these people bastards without hesitation. But it's
yes, those are the facts, and yes, the moral. I think there might not be.
It doesn't contribute anything to the discussion. If any activist wants to take this book or anything I have written and actually make a case, I may even support it. I have no problem with that. But I'm not writing as an activist. I'm writing as a historian. So eventually, the truth will emerge. The fact that the Spanish and the Portuguese continue to traffic human beings in the Atlantic in terrible conditions, with no regards for the life of Africans, including women, including children. This is there, but also the fact that the British or the French, they try to take advantage of their abolitionist campaigns to gain footholds in Africa, to gain new colonies, to set up plantations, to expand civilization and Christianity, and all this is right there. But it's not for me. I'm not writing from that.
It's not the perspective. It's just.
But it's there. It's there, and people. It's there, and people can use it. I'm more than happy to. And I actually have my own opinions. You can go to Twitter and you will see them. But
Okay, we have a question from Helene Molyneux. Two questions. What finally happened to the slaves of the Maria Gloria? Yeah. And the second one, in the case of quarantine facilities ships, who paid the cost for that?
Interesting. Okay. Hi, Helen. How are you doing? So basically, the first question is a mixed bag. So some of them were so sick that they had to disembark in Freetown, and some of them survived. The other ones, the ones that started crossing the Atlantic in one direction and another, if I recall well, most of them died. And some of them remained when the ship was captured by a British ship, if I recall well, that took the Maria Gloria to Bahia, if I recall well. And from then they went to Rio. And if I recall well, they were emancipated. But even if I recall well, I may be wrong here, even the lack of an emancipated African was nowhere near freedom. Okay, they were still pretty much apprentice and forced to work for somebody, and very often they would be absconded and they would never see freedom in their life. There are brilliant books about this. Beatriz Mamigonian, for instance, has written a brilliant book about this. It's called Africanos Libres. In the case of the quarantine facilities, it depended. Sometimes the government would pay for these facilities, but very often what happened here is that whenever a slave ship was captured, you have to remember the slave ship had human beings on board, but also have merchandise sometimes, right? So whatever was in the ship would be sold in public auction. And that includes very often the ship. Sometimes when the ship was still in good conditions, it would be sold as a ship, or sometimes they would destroy the ship and would sell the ship by parts. So very often what happened is that the ships were resold to the same slave traders who re-engaged them in the transatlantic slave trade. They changed the name of a ship, they changed the ownership, but it's the same people. There are multiple cases well documented about this. With that money, the courts would be able to pay salaries, and they would be able to pay to a certain extent for installations as well, facilities, etc. But governments were also forced to foot some of the bills sometimes. And you have to remember as well that it's not only these facilities that needed to pay for. British sailors, this is a discussion as well that is going on right now. British sailors and British captains and doctors in each Royal Navy ship were paid for each African they freed, each and every one of them. So there would actually, in the book, there is a note specifying how much each of them get in the case of the Negrito. So they would be taken to when they would come back to England, this money would be transferred to a bank in England, and they would be paid for all the Africans they had free. And of course, the captain of a ship would get way more money than a simple sailor, but everybody would get money.
I don't see more questions for the public. I would like thank you, very interesting from Helen. To come to our discussion, which projects are you working at the moment? The same field.
I'm working on 2 books. I don't know which one is going to go first. One of them is focusing on the suppression of piracy in the 19th century in the entire planet, in the world. So I'm looking at trying to expand the same approach, but focusing on how different empires, not only European, also the Chinese and the Siamese and other empires, they actually focus on suppressing anything that they consider to be maritime raiding. This is one book, and the other one that I'm starting to work on now is going to be a history of the first Anglo-Asante War. And what I'm trying to do is, first of all, to write the first ever book on this war that hasn't been written yet, but more importantly, to place it within global British expansionism at the time, colonialism at the time. There are several places where the British Empire is trying to carve territories, and Ghana, or Ghana is one of them. And the interesting thing is that there are multiple places where they are actually defeated. They receive substantial defeats, and this is one of them. So I'm trying to bring this history into wider global histories of British colonialism and expansionism in this period, but also to highlight the agency and the role of Africans in this story.
Okay, so you are working 2 projects, 2 books at the same time.
They're completely different, which
a challenge, a bit of a challenge.
With new languages as well.
Thank you very much, Manuel. It was a great talk with you, very interesting, and many things to think about it. And to our audience also, thank you very much. Muchas gracias por estar con nosotros. Buenas noches y esperamos, we hope to have you in our next cultural events here in the Instituto Cervantes in Leeds and Manchester. Thank you very much.
Thank you.